New Zealand's Prime Minister is calling on leaders around the world to take action against violent acts of extremism that are shown online. This week, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, along with French President Emmanuel Macron, launched a new effort that they're calling the Christchurch Call. Christchurch, of course, is where 51 people were killed, dozens more wounded in attacks on 2 mosques back in March, which were recorded by the killer and, as you know, live streamed. According to Ardern, the original video was watched about 4,000 times before Facebook took it down. Within the first 24 hours of the attack, 1.5 million copies were removed from the site, while they were being uploaded to YouTube at a rate of 1 per second during that same time period. And that's why she's calling on tech leaders and others to take a stand.
This attack was specifically designed to be broadcast and to go viral. There is more work to be done here when it comes to stopping the proliferation of online and violent extremism.
Well, 18 governments and 5 tech giants, including Amazon, Google, Facebook, have signed on to the Christchurch Call. The U.S. government declines, citing freedom of speech concerns. And today, the spread of these kinds of internet videos is just one step in fighting extremism. There's also a lot more to be done, both online and offline, to stop its spread. And to steal a phrase, it takes a village. That case is laid out in the new book. It's called How We Win, How Cutting-Edge Entrepreneurs, Political Visionaries, Enlightened Business Leaders, and Social Media Mavens Can Defeat the Extremist Threat. The author, a former diplomat under both Presidents Bush and Barack Obama, the first ever U.S. Special Representative to Muslim communities, Farah Pandith, joins me now. It's great to meet you. Thanks so much for being here. So much of extremism is obviously fostered online. Do efforts like this Christchurch thing, I assume it has huge potential to make a difference?
It has huge potential to make a difference. Of course it does. Leadership matters. How you talk about this issue and putting a focus on this really is important. We have seen a failure of governments, of the corporates, to actually take this seriously 20 years after 9/11. So it's about time, and I'm really happy to see this happen.
When you say leadership matters, absence of leadership matters also. The fact that the U.S. is opting out under this pretense of concern about, first, the freedom of speech issues, how much does that cripple an operation like this?
It's not going to cripple it, but what is it saying? How serious are we taking this threat? We have an increase of hate around the world. The us versus them ideology has not decreased, it's increased and manifested in ways that we couldn't even imagine. In order to think about the future today and tomorrow, we have to actually do something more than what's been done before.
Can we stay on the current president just for one more second? How hard is the kind of work you were doing for people like you when the most visible person in the world says things like this?
I don't see the people that knocked down the World Trade Center going back to Sweden, okay?
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
I think Islam hates us. There's something there that there's a tremendous hatred there.
What's the trickle-down effect of statements like that?
It's disastrous. President Trump has actually made a huge difference in the way in which extremist groups can actually increase their recruitment. Using phrases that he uses to say what it is that they believe, which is America is at war with Islam, makes a difference.
Literally using videos of him.
Yes.
Literally using that.
Yes.
Can you describe, I said before what your job was, the first of its kind. Can you describe to people what exactly was it was under Barack Obama, well, Secretary Clinton, but under Barack Obama. Explain what your mission was.
We know that in order to stop terrorists, we have to use military power. Of course, the physical manifestations of war make a difference. But we also have to stop recruitment. They can't get armies if they don't recruit people. So that whole idea, the ideological component about an us versus them narrative, what the bad guys use to recruit, is the work of countering violent extremism. The work that I did as special representative to Muslim communities was to build programs around the world to make sure that young kids don't find that ideology appealing.
I'm going to return to the actual work for a second, but you bring some painful personal experience to this in Kashmir in terms of some of your family members in violence. Can you share that with us?
Well, one of the things that's important is as you look at how things have changed on the world stage, where it begins, you look within smaller communities. How do people get absorbed with this us versus them ideology? Sometimes the trigger has to do with everything around a person's identity and belonging. And so there are places all around the world in which you see that. I was actually born in northern India, in Kashmir, and I did my master's research on the insurgency in Kashmir between India and Pakistan and watched how militants have been able to be manufactured.
What happened to family members there in 93?
Well, in 93, 2 family members were killed in early April of 1993, which actually brought it home, very closely.
So young people, we knew this even before you, are the most vulnerable to recruitment, but you have an unconventional path to getting to them. What is that path?
You have to, first of all, engage at the grassroots. You cannot be preparing a path forward by government telling a young person how to think about their identity. You need to be thinking with them about what's missing in their communities so that they can reject for themselves the ideology of us versus
And who are
them.
the best communicators, according to you?
The
of that
very best
message?
communicators are obviously those people who used to be extremists. So if you take former extremists and you pull their content and develop that content so that it can go forward in ways that peers can understand it, you have a much better option ahead of you than government saying, please don't, join a terrorist organization.
Do you subscribe to the notion that regardless of who the recruiters are, whether they're ISIS or white supremacists, that approach is the best way to crack into the minds of young people?
It's essential that we understand what is happening at a local level, and it is essential that we use people who are credible to the people who are vulnerable to persuade them to think otherwise. It cannot be that you're looking at somebody who is thinking about the magnificence of an ideology and a government telling them how to think about it, or somebody outside of their peer group thinking about it. It has to come from people that they trust and that are authentic to them.
And does that, to borrow an unfortunate phrase, does that help undo the fake news that they absorb online? Is that the
Look, what's happening in the online space is very serious. How people get absorbed and understand what they think is real. That is a very important thing. But Jim, what's happening in the offline space is important too. You don't just exist in the online space without any connectivity with the offline space. So we need to understand that the solutions are both offline and online and connected.
Can we talk a little bit about what's going on in Iran for a second? I'm sure everybody at home knows there's escalation, at least beyond verbal. We're pulling some American personnel from Baghdad. There are reports of as many as 120 troops ready to be deployed. On one end, we have John Bolton, the war whisperer, as he called him. Interestingly, it appears that Donald Trump is the voice of moderation so far. If tensions do escalate, how much do we risk inflaming extremism in that part of the world?
Look, my approach to all of this is that it is global. You are not looking at triggers at specific parts of the world being the thing we ought to be looking at. That's the mistake we made after 9/11.
Meaning it all feeds off each other? Is that what you mean?
Meaning that the threat we have are the people that are going to join extremist groups, and they are millennials and Generation Z. We're not restricting ideology to a certain part of the world. We understand that ideas have no borders. So what's happening, of course, in Iran or in the Middle East or in South Asia does matter. But what matters more is how those ideas are spread globally across platforms, across networks, across peer groups.
Can we spend a minute, though, back home, and I accept your global warning here, but are we spending too much time in this country focusing on Muslim extremism when we know that the numbers say that it's white supremacists that are doing most of the damage and the terror?
America has been lazy on hate on every level.
What do you mean?
That
lazy?
means we see a rise of anti-Semitism and we just say there's a rise of anti-Semitism. What are we going to do about it? This didn't just appear yesterday. White supremacists didn't just, decide that they were going to do this over the course of the last 2 years and come forward. There have been indications for decades that things have been growing. And in the context of the last 5 years, we have seen changes in Europe and in America vis-a-vis anti-Semitism. And yet we haven't talked about it. We haven't deployed programs to stop it. We haven't stood up to say that this is not the kind of thing that we think is acceptable. And now we are in a situation in 2019 where we not only have Al-Qaeda and ISIS and other kinds of extremism that use Islam to recruit young Muslims. But on top of that, we have a growing white supremacist movement, not only in our country, but around the world that is learning from what they have seen ISIS and Al-Qaeda do. And so we have a terribly serious situation on our hands where hate has risen and we haven't done enough. It is incumbent upon us today to think about the world we want to live in. We have a choice to make. We have a choice to make on what we want to do. Either hate's okay, and we should all step back and say, why are we even trying to stop it? Or we can say it is not. And if we're saying it is not okay to be in a community in which us versus them thrives, it is our responsibility, governors, mayors, citizens in our cities and towns around the world, to say, what can we do to protect young people from joining not just white supremacist groups, but other groups that are actually preying upon them as well.
And you answer that question beautifully in your book. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for
Thank
your time.
you.
I appreciate it. The book, again, is How We Win, How Cutting-Edge Entrepreneurs, Political Visionaries, Enlightened Business Leaders, and Social Media Mavens Can Defeat the Extremist Threat.